Welcome to Caledonia Sleeps, your peaceful escape into the heart of Scotland. Tonight, the fire glows steady in the hearth, casting soft light across the stone walls of this Highland cottage. Outside, the world rests beneath a blanket of snow. The peaks of the mountains rise dark against a sky heavy with winter clouds, though the days have begun to stretch just a little longer. If you listen carefully, you might hear the wind whistling through the bare branches of the trees, or the distant call of birds returning to the lochs. We stand at the threshold, not the threshold of a door, but of time itself. The darkest months lie behind us, yet spring feels impossibly distant. The earth sleeps, but not as deeply as before. Something stirs beneath the frozen ground. Something awakens in the lengthening light. Tonight we journey into the folklore of a festival celebrated on the 1st of February, one of the 4 great turning points of the ancient Celtic year. In Ireland it was called Imbolc, but here in Scotland it was known as Là Fhèill Brìghde, Breed's Day, and later as Candlemas. This is Scotland's festival of fire and water, of sacred flames and holy wells, of a goddess who walks the land on the first night of February. It is a celebration both intimate and powerful, woven into the rhythm of Highland life for countless generations. Here in Scotland, Breed's Day carried its own particular customs, distinct from those of Ireland, though sharing the same Gaelic roots. It was a festival celebrated not in grand public gatherings, but in the quiet of homes, in the lighting of candles at windows, in prayers whispered over the hearth fire, in the walking of sunwise circles around ancient wells. So let us settle by the fire, let the warmth seep into your bones, and let us travel together into the customs and stories of Là Fhèill Brìghde in Scotland, when winter begins its slow retreat and the serpent stirs beneath the hill. In Scottish Gaelic, the name means Breed's Feast Day, the festival held on the 1st of February, while our Irish cousins called this time Imbolc, a word whose exact meaning scholars still debate. The Scots knew it simply as Breed's Day, or in later Christian times, as part of the Candlemas celebrations on the 2nd of February. The name Breed is a Scottish form of Brigid, and this day belonged entirely to her. The festival falls on the 1st of February, though in the old Celtic reckoning, the day began at sunset. So Breed's Day truly started on the eve of January the 31st, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the sacred time began. This date marks a halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. The darkest day of the year lies behind, but the balance has not yet tipped toward light. We stand at the hinge, the turning point, when winter's grip begins to loosen, though its hand still lies heavy on the land. For the people of the Scottish Highlands and Islands, this was no abstract measurement of celestial movements. It was a matter of survival. The winter stores of grain and salted meat were running low. The cattle, kept inside through the worst of the cold, were growing thin. Fuel was scarce. Every household counted the weeks until fresh food would be available again. But at Brigid's Day, hope arrived. The sheep, hardier than cattle and better able to survive on the sparse winter vegetation, began to lactate. Milk returned. Fresh food, rich in fat and protein, flowed once more. Lambs would soon be born, bringing new life and the promise of future abundance. The people watched for signs. They looked to the earth for the first snowdrops pushing through the frozen soil, white and delicate and impossibly brave. They watched for blackthorn beginning to bud, though snow might still fall. They listened for the return of the oyster catchers, Brigid's servants, whose arrival signalled that spring was truly on its way. The festival was one of 4 great turning points in the Celtic year. Samhain marked the beginning of winter and the time when the veil between worlds grew thin. Beltane celebrated the height of spring and the return of warmth. Lunasa honoured the first harvest. And Brigid's Day, the quietest of the 4, marked the first stirring of life, the quickening, the moment when winter began to lose its hold. In Scotland, the festival blended seamlessly with Christian observance. The 1st of February became St. Brigid's Day, and the 2nd of February became Candlemas, when candles were blessed in churches and carried in procession. But beneath the Christian overlay, the older practices persisted. Brigid the saint and Brigid the goddess walked hand in hand through the Highland landscape, and the people honoured both without seeing contradiction. For this was a practical festival, rooted in the needs of an agricultural society. Whether you called upon a saint or a goddess mattered less than ensuring the blessing of the fields, the health of the livestock, the protection of the home. Brigid's Day was about survival, and survival required every tool, every prayer, every ritual handed down through generations. So as February arrived and the wind still howled across the moors, the people of Scotland prepared. They gathered rushes from the river banks. They cleaned their homes. They made ready to welcome a visitor who walked the land on the eve of Brigid's Day, bringing blessings to those who honoured her. To understand Brigid's Day in Scotland is to understand Brigid herself. But who was she? Goddess or saint, ancient deity or medieval holy woman? The answer perhaps is both and neither. Brigid exists in that liminal space where myth and history blur, where the old gods transformed to survive in a new religious landscape. In Celtic tradition, the figure known in Ireland as Brigid was goddess of poetry, of smithcraft, and of healing. Three domains that seem disparate until you understand the Celtic worldview. Poetry was not mere entertainment, but a sacred art, a form of magic wielded by the Fhèill, the poet-seers who held great power in ancient society. Smithcraft was transformation, the ability to take raw ore and forge it into tools and weapons, to work with fire and make the impossible real. And healing was the restoration of wholeness, the mending of what was broken. Fire united all three, the fire of inspiration that sparked poetry, the forge fire that melted and shaped metal, the healing warmth that drove away fever and brought comfort to the sick. She was, above all, a goddess of fire, of light, of that animating spark that makes life possible. In Scotland, she was known as Brigid. She was Brigid of the golden hair, Brigid of the white wands, Brigid of the flocks. She was foster mother to Christ himself in Scottish tradition, an astonishing claim that placed her at the very centre of the sacred story. The concept of fosterage was crucial in Celtic society. A child raised by a foster parent was bound to that family by ties, considered even stronger than blood. A Highland proverb declared, "Blood to the 20th generation, fosterage to the 100th." To name Brigid as Christ's foster mother was to claim an intimacy, a relationship of profound trust and love. But alongside the goddess stood the saint, Saint Brigid of Kildare, born around the year 450, was a bess and miracle worker, one of the great Celtic saints. Her feast day was February the 1st, the same day, the same fire symbolism, the same association with healing, with poetry, with protection. The blending was not accidental. When Christianity spread through Celtic lands, the missionaries were wise enough to know that they could not simply erase the old beliefs. Instead, they transformed them. Pagan holy days became Christian feast days. Sacred wells dedicated to goddesses became wells dedicated to saints, and the Irish Brigid, beloved goddess of fire and poetry, became Brigid the Saint, whose attributes and feast day mirrored the goddess so closely that the people could honour both without conflict. In Kildare, Ireland, a perpetual flame was tended by women, first by priestesses of the goddess, later by nuns of St. Brigid's monastery. In Scotland, every hearth fire was Brigid's flame. Every candle lit in her honour carried her blessing. The perpetual flame was not kept in a single great temple, but in thousands of humble homes, where the peat fire was carefully smoored each night and coaxed back to life each morning. Brigid's symbols were many, the cow and the sheep, for she blessed the flocks, the swan, graceful and white and otherworldly, the forge and the anvil, the birch tree and the rowan, fresh milk and butter, white flowers and green rushes, but above all, fire, the sacred flame that represented life itself, the warmth of the hearth, the light that drives away darkness. She had another symbol too, one that Scotland claimed as particularly its own, the serpent, the white serpent. For in Scottish tradition, Brigid did not simply walk the land on her feast day. She emerged from the earth itself in the form of a great white snake, bringing with her the promise of spring. Of all the Brigid's Day traditions unique to Scotland, none is more striking than the story of the white serpent. This is Brigid in her most ancient aspect, predating the saint, reaching back to a time when the goddess was understood as the very life force of the land itself. There is a place near Glenelg in the Scottish Highlands, not far from Inverness, where folklore tells of an old burial mound rising from the earth. Local tradition held that Brigid dwelt within this mound, sleeping through the winter months. But on the 1st of February, on Brigid's Day morning, stories say she emerged, not as a woman, but as a serpent, a great white serpent, luminous and powerful. The image resonates deeply. The serpent has long been understood as a symbol of regeneration, of healing, of transformation, the creature that sheds its skin and is born anew. In many ancient cultures, serpents were associated with goddesses, with the earth, with the mysteries of life and death. In Scotland, the serpent was Brigid's creature, and she herself could take its form. In some Highland communities, people enacted this emergence ritually. They would take a stocking or a long cloth bag and stuff it full of peat, shaping it to resemble a serpent. On the morning of Brigid's Day, this peat serpent would be brought out and its head symbolically struck while verses were chanted. The ritual was recorded by folklorist Alexander Carmichael in the 19th century, though he notes it was already falling out of practice by this time. The peat serpent's head was bashed in while the person recited, "This is the day of Brigid, the serpent shall come from the hole, though there be 3 feet of snow on the surface of the ground." The meaning of striking the serpent's head has puzzled those who study these traditions. Was this a hostile act, a way of controlling or subduing the power emerging from the earth? Or might it have been something else entirely, perhaps a ritual awakening, a knock on the door of the underworld to rouse the sleeping goddess? Some interpret it as a way of ensuring the serpent emerged in its proper form, not as a threat, but as a blessing. Without more context, we can only speculate, but the ritual clearly held significance for those who practiced it. The serpent was not always called by that name. In Scottish folk tradition, people often avoided speaking the true names of powerful creatures, fearing to attract unwanted attention, so they used euphemisms. The serpent might be called Ivor's daughter, though the origin of this phrase and the identity of Ivor have been lost to time, if indeed they were ever widely known. In some regions, people called snakes windies to avoid insulting the spirit of the creature. But at Breed's Day, the serpent could be named. It was Breed's creature, under her protection, and therefore safe to acknowledge. More than safe, necessary. For the emergence of the serpent was a sign, a promise that the worst of winter had passed. Real snakes in Scotland, the adders and grass snakes, do emerge from hibernation around this time, if the weather permits. Watching for them was part of the weather divination practised at Breed's Day. If serpents were seen, spring was truly near. If they remained hidden, winter would linger. The white serpent imagery connects to other Celtic traditions. In Welsh mythology, the white snake appears as a creature of wisdom and transformation. In ancient British lore, serpents were associated with healing wells and sacred springs. The intertwining of serpent and goddess, of snake and sacred feminine, runs deep in the Celtic imagination. At Breed's Day, the white serpent represented all that Breed embodied. Regeneration, for the serpent sheds its skin and is reborn. Healing, for serpent venom was used in ancient medicine, and serpent imagery marked healing sites. Transformation, for the goddess herself moved between forms, between saint and deity, between woman and snake, between winter and spring. To honour the serpent was to honour the life force returning to the land. It was to acknowledge that beneath the frozen surface, in the dark places under stone and root, something stirred, something ancient and patient and powerful, something that would, when the time was right, emerge into the light and bring the blessing of spring. So the people of the Highlands watched for serpents on Breed's Day. They left offerings of milk or mead for the white serpent. They spoke the protective charms. They waited through the still cold days of February for the promise to be fulfilled. While some festivals celebrated with great public gatherings, bonfires on hilltops, and communities coming together in ritual, Breed's Day in Scotland was more intimate. It was a festival of the hearth and home, celebrated by families in their own cottages, with their own particular customs passed down through generations. The evening of January the 31st was known as Breed's Eve. This was when the goddess saint was said to walk the land, visiting homes and bringing blessings to those who welcomed her properly. Preparations began days before. The house would be cleaned from top to bottom, a spring cleaning in the depths of winter. Floors were swept, walls scrubbed, all clutter cleared away. This was both practical and symbolic. Physically, the home needed to be ready for the visitor. Spiritually, the cleaning was a form of purification, sweeping out the old year's accumulated troubles to make space for new blessings. On Breed's Eve, Specific rituals were performed. One of the most widespread was the making of Brigid's bed. Family members, usually the women and girls of the household, would gather rushes or straw and fashion them into a small bed or nest. This was placed near the hearth, the warmest and most honoured spot in the home. A corn dolly would be made to represent Brigid herself. This was called the Cailleach, the little Brigid. The dolly was crafted from the last sheaf of grain harvested the previous autumn, which had been kept carefully through the winter for this purpose. The grain held within it all the life and fertility of the growing season, preserved and concentrated. The Cailleach was dressed in white cloth if available, or whatever fine fabric the family could spare. She might be decorated with early spring flowers if any could be found, or with greenery, shells or crystals. Some families placed a small stone over her heart, representing the Star of Bethlehem, blending Christian symbolism with older traditions. Once the bed was ready and the Cailleach prepared, the ritual of invitation began. A member of the household, often the eldest woman, would carry the Cailleach to the threshold. She would knock 3 times on the door, then call out 3 times, "Brigid, Brigid, come in, thy bed is ready." Someone inside would answer, welcoming Brigid into the home. The Cailleach would be placed gently in her bed of rushes, and the household would then prepare for her blessing. Food and drink were left out. A bowl of fresh milk, if available, a piece of bread or a bannock, perhaps some butter. Whatever the family could spare was offered to the goddess. These offerings served multiple purposes. They honoured Brigid, yes, but they also represented faith in abundance. Even when stores were low, the family gave what they had, trusting it would be returned manyfold. Another crucial custom was the brat Brigid, Brigid's cloak or mantle, a strip of cloth, a ribbon, or even an entire garment would be left outside overnight, hung on a bush or draped over the doorstep or windowsill. The belief was that Brigid, walking the land, would pass by and bless the cloth. By morning, the cloth had become a powerful protective talisman. It could be used to cure ailments. A strip might be tied around a sore limb to ease pain. It could be placed on the forehead to relieve a fever. Women might keep it as protection during childbirth. Farmers used blessed cloths to protect cattle from disease. Over time, as the cloth was used year after year to receive Brigid's blessing, it was believed to grow more powerful, accumulating sacred energy. The family would stay awake through much of the night, or at least until the fire was carefully smoored. They might tell stories, sing old songs, or simply sit together in companionable silence, aware that this was a sacred time, that the threshold between worlds was thin, that Brigid walked abroad. In the morning, there was one final ritual. The family would examine the ashes of the hearth fire. If there were marks in the ash, Patterns or what looked like footprints, these were taken as signs that Brigid had indeed visited. Such marks were considered tremendously lucky, a blessing for the entire year ahead. Some families would carefully preserve the ash with Brigid's footprints, using it later for healing or protection. The rushes used to make Brigid's bed were not wasted. In the days following Brigid's Day, they would be woven into Brigid's crosses, protective symbols hung over doorways, windows, and in byres and barns. The making of these crosses was its own ritual, though less common in Scotland than in Ireland. In some parts of the Highlands, and particularly in the Hebrides, young unmarried women and girls had special roles in Brigid's Day celebrations. They would form groups and carry the Cailleach from house to house in procession, singing songs in Brigid's honour. At each door, they would ask for offerings for Brigid. Families would give what they could: coins, food, a blessing. After visiting the homes of the community, the young people would gather together for their own feast, the offerings collected being used to prepare food and drink. They would spend the evening in celebration, and some traditions held that this was when Brigid's blessing on marriages was strongest, making it an auspicious time for courtship. But even in homes where no procession arrived, where the family celebrated quietly on their own, the core rituals remained the same. The bed was made, the Cailleach was welcomed, the cloth was blessed, food was offered, and the hearth fire, the heart of the home, was tended with special care, for it too was sacred to Brigid. This was Brigid's Day at its most human level, not grand theology or abstract symbolism, but practical acts of devotion woven into daily life. The making of a bed for a divine visitor, the leaving of food when food was scarce, the watching and waiting through the night, the checking of ashes for signs of blessing. In these simple acts, the people of Scotland maintained their connection to the sacred, to the turning of the seasons, to the goddess who had walked their land since time immemorial. If Brigid was goddess of fire, then the hearth was her altar. In every Highland home, the fire was more than a source of warmth and a place to cook. It was the living heart of the household, the sacred flame that connected the family to their ancestors, to the gods, to the very essence of life itself. The hearth fire in traditional Scottish homes was fed with peat, that ancient fuel cut from the bogs, dried and stacked for the winter. Peat burns slowly and steadily, with a distinctive earthy smell and a warmth that seeps deep into the bones. It does not flame up like wood, but rather glows, the embers holding their heat for hours. To allow the fire to go out completely was considered catastrophic. It meant the household had lost its protection, its connection to the sacred. Some families boasted that their hearth fire had been burning continuously for generations, the flame passed down from mother to daughter, grandmother to grandchild, an unbroken line of light reaching back into the distant past. So each night the fire was smoored. The Scots word means to smother or bank, to cover the coals in such a way that they would burn slowly through the night without needing tending. It was a skill, an art passed from the elder woman to the younger, part of the domestic knowledge that kept a household alive through the long northern winters. The smooring of the fire was not done in silence. It was accompanied by prayers, often in Gaelic, invoking protection for the sleeping household. Folklorist Alexander Carmichael recorded many of these prayers in the Carmina Gadelica. One begins, "I smoor the fire this night, as the Son of Mary would smoor. Blessed be the house, blessed be the fire, blessed be the people all." The person smooring the fire would use a special stick or the fire irons to carefully arrange the peat, covering the glowing coals with ash to slow their burning. She might trace a cross over the hearth or arrange the coals in a pattern that held symbolic meaning. All the while, she would recite the prayers, calling on Brigid, on Mary, on Christ, on the saints, on the old gods whose names were no longer spoken aloud, but whose presence was still felt. On Brigid's Day particularly, families would add fresh peat to the fire before smooring it, ensuring it would burn bright through Brigid's visitation. Some would place 3 pieces of peat in a specific pattern, representing the triple aspect of the goddess. When morning came, the fire had to be revived, uncovering the embers, blowing gently to encourage the flame, adding fuel carefully so as not to smother the fragile rekindling. This too was done with prayers, welcoming the new day. Candles were lit throughout the house on Brigid's Eve and Brigid's Day. Every window would have a candle burning, transforming the home into a beacon of light in the dark landscape, signalling to the goddess that the home welcomed her. Each flame was a small echo of Brigid's sacred fire. In the lowlands and some parts of the Highlands, the tradition of the Candlemas blaze was observed. On the 2nd of February, Candlemas Day, communities would gather at the town cross or Mercat cross, bearing torches and candles. A bonfire would be lit, or a large clump of gorse or whin bushes set ablaze. People would dance around the fire, celebrating the growing light and the promise of spring. The connection between Brigid and fire went deep. Fire was transformation, turning the raw into the cooked, the cold into the warm, the dark into the light. Fire was the tool of the blacksmith, Brigid's special domain, where metal was heated until it glowed and could be shaped. Fire was purification, the fever that burned away illness. In Scottish lore, Brigid was even said to have been born with a flame rising from her head, a visible sign of her divine nature. The women who tended the fire were in their daily work, priestesses of the sacred flame. They were Brigid's servants, holding the life of the household in their hands each time they smoored the fire at night and revived it in the morning. The goddess walked abroad on Brìghde's night, but she lived year-round in every hearth that burned, in every candle that flickered, in every spark of warmth and light that pushed back the darkness and the cold. If fire was Brigid's first element, water was her second. Throughout Scotland, and particularly in the Highlands and Islands, sacred springs and holy wells dotted the landscape. Many were dedicated to Brigid, and Brigid's Day was a time when these wells received special attention. The tradition of holy wells stretches back far beyond Christianity. In Celtic belief, water was liminal, a boundary between worlds. Springs emerged from deep within the earth, from the other world itself. Rivers flowed from the mysterious heights down to the sea. Water gave life, but it could also take it. Water healed, but it could also drown. Water was powerful and must be approached with respect. When Christianity arrived, many pagan sacred springs were redirected to Christian saints, but the rituals surrounding them changed remarkably little. People still came seeking healing. They still made offerings. They still walked ritual circuits around the well, always moving sunwise, the direction of the sun's travel across the sky. Brìghde's wells, as they were known in Scotland, were scattered across the landscape. Some were famous, drawing pilgrims from distant places. Others were small, local, known only to nearby communities, but all were treated as sacred, as places where the veil between worlds grew thin, and prayers might be heard with special clarity. On Brìghde's Day, visiting Brìghde's well was a central ritual. People would make their way to the nearest sacred spring, often travelling through snow and bitter cold. The journey itself was part of the practice, a pilgrimage in miniature, an act of devotion that demonstrated commitment. Upon arriving at the well, there was a specific procedure to follow. First, you walked around the well 3 times, always sunwise, never counter to the sun's direction, which was considered unlucky and dangerous. As you walked, you prayed, asking for healing or blessing or protection, whatever your need might be. Some wells had flat stones nearby where you could kneel. Others were simply openings in the rock or ground, the water bubbling up from hidden depths. You might cup your hands and drink the water, cold and pure. You might splash it on your face, your hands, the back of your neck. You might collect some in a bottle or jar to take home, where it would be used to bless the hearth, the threshold, family members, even the livestock. The water from Brìghde's wells was believed to have healing properties. It could cure ailments, ease pain, bring relief to the suffering. People would visit seeking help for specific illnesses, and many wells developed reputations for curing particular problems. One well might be known for relieving headaches, another for helping with eye problems, a third for easing stomach complaints. After walking the circuit and drinking or collecting the water, the next step was to leave an offering. This might be a coin dropped into the water with a wish or prayer, but more commonly it was a clootie, a strip of cloth or ribbon. The clootie tradition is distinctly Scottish and Irish. You would tear a strip of fabric from your clothing or bring a ribbon or piece of cloth specifically for this purpose. You would dip it in the well water, soaking it thoroughly. Then you would tie it to a branch of the tree growing near the well, usually a rowan, hawthorn, or other trees considered sacred in Celtic tradition. As you tied the clootie, you would make your wish or say your prayer aloud or silently. The belief was that as the cloth weathered and rotted away, so too would your ailment or problem fade. The clootie represented the illness or trouble being left behind, given to the well, to breed, to be carried away by wind and rain and time. Some wells became forests of clooties, thousands of strips of cloth hanging from every available branch, fluttering in the wind like prayer flags, white and red and blue and green, new ones bright and old ones faded to grey, all representing hopes and prayers and the faith that the sacred well could help. Certain wells in Scotland are particularly associated with Brigid and Brigid. Near the village of Munlochy on the Black Isle, there is a clootie well at an ancient spring, dedicated to St. Curaton. But the well is visited on Breed's Day and is thick with offerings. The well at Culloden, in the heart of the woods near the famous battlefield, is another clootie well, traditionally visited on the first Sunday in May, but also honoured on Breed's Day. Craigie Well at Och on the Black Isle has both coins and clooties. The well at Faughart in Ireland, associated with Breed's birthplace, draws pilgrims from Scotland as well as Ireland, particularly on Breed's feast day. These pilgrimages continued well into the 20th century and have experienced a revival in recent decades as people reconnect with traditional practices. Even those who do not believe in the literal power of the wells often find something meaningful in the ritual. The walking of the circuit, the cold shock of spring water, the tying of the cloth and the speaking of a wish, the leaving of a prayer in a sacred place. In the 19th century, some Highland communities combined the well visit with other Breed's Day customs. After drawing water from Breed's well, families would bring it home and use it in a ritual called seining, the Scottish practice of purification and blessing. Water from the well would be sprinkled through the house, every room, every corner, every threshold. It would be dabbed on the foreheads of family members, especially children. It would be carried out to the byre and sprinkled on the cattle and sheep. It would be used to bless the fields, though often this was done later in the spring when planting began. The act of seining with water was usually combined with smoke. After sprinkling the blessed water, the house would be sealed tight, every door and window closed. Then juniper branches would be set alight, filling the house with thick, pungent smoke. This drove out any evil spirits or negative influences that had accumulated over winter. When the house was thoroughly smoked, all the doors and windows would be thrown open, letting in fresh air and new blessings. This combination of water and smoke, of cleansing and purification, was distinctly Scottish. It honoured both Brigid's domains, water and fire, coolness and heat, the spring and the flame. Wells were also places where offerings of another kind might be made, not just cloth and coins, but milk, which was precious and closely associated with Brigid. Some people would pour fresh milk into the well as an offering, or leave a bowl of milk nearby. Whiskey or ale might be offered as well, libations to the goddess, to the spirits of the place, to the ancestors. The wells reminded people that blessings flowed from the earth itself, that healing came from the land, that the sacred was not distant but immediate, as close as the nearest spring. To visit Brigid's Well on Brigid's Day was to participate in a practice older than memory, to walk in the footsteps of countless ancestors who had come to this same place, seeking the same things: health, protection, hope, connection to something greater than themselves. And the water, cold and pure and rising from the deep earth, was Brigid's gift, freely given to all who approached with respect and need. No discussion on Brigid's Day in Scotland would be complete without speaking of the Cailleach, the great hag of winter, for while Brigid's Day belonged to Brigid, the days surrounding it were a time of contest between two powerful forces, the young goddess of spring and the ancient winter crone. The Cailleach is one of the most enduring figures in Scottish mythology. Her name means old woman or hag, but she is far more than a simple personification of winter. She is a primal force, a goddess of the wild mountains, of storms and stone. In some tales, she is a creator figure who shaped the landscape itself, dropping boulders from her apron to form mountains, striking the earth with her staff to create valleys. She is old beyond measure. She appears as a woman of enormous height, with blue-grey skin and teeth like the edge of a grinding stone. One eye, enormous and baleful, sits in the centre of her forehead. In some stories, she carries a great hammer with which she strikes the earth, freezing it solid. In others, she has a collection of different staffs or wands, each one bringing a different kind of weather. The Cailleach ruled over the winter months, from Samhain at the end of October until Beltane at the beginning of May. The land was hers. She brought the storms, the snow, the bitter winds that howled across the moors. She was not evil, but she was harsh, unforgiving, a reminder that nature is powerful and indifferent to human comfort. But on Brigid's Day, her power began to wane. The precise relationship between the Cailleach and Brigid varies in different tellings. Some traditions present them as enemies, locked in eternal struggle for control of the land. Other stories suggest they may be two aspects of the same goddess, the Cailleach transforming into Brigid and back again in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. One version of the story, recorded in later folklore collections, tells that on the eve of Brigid's Day, the Cailleach makes a journey. She travels to the land of the ever-young, the other world, seeking a place deep in an enchanted forest where the well of youth springs from the earth. Before dawn on Brigid's Day morning, she drinks from the well. The transformation is immediate. Her grey skin turns white and pink. Her tangled hair becomes golden. Her bent back straightens. She becomes Brigid, young and radiant, goddess of the growing season. Whether this represents an ancient belief or a later storytelling convention, we cannot say for certain, but the image powerfully captures the transition from winter's harshness to spring's promise. But perhaps the most famous Cailleach tradition connected to Brigid's Day involves weather divination. According to Highland lore, the Cailleach needed firewood to last through the remainder of winter. On Brigid's Day, she would go out gathering fuel. If the day was bright and sunny, she could gather a great deal of wood, which meant she was preparing for a winter to continue for a good while longer. Therefore, sunshine on Brigid's Day was considered bad luck, a sign that winter would not release its grip soon. But if Brigid's Day was stormy, cold, wet and miserable, this was actually good news. It meant the Cailleach was still asleep, too tired to gather wood, which suggested her power was fading, and winter would soon be over. A foul Brigid's Day meant an early spring. This weather lore was taken very seriously. People watched the skies on February the 1st with great attention. This tradition of weather watching on Brigid's Day is thought to be the origin of Groundhog Day in North America. German settlers in Pennsylvania brought with them a tradition of watching for badgers on Candlemas. If the badger saw its shadow, meaning the day was sunny, winter would continue. If the day was cloudy and the badger saw no shadow, spring was near. The tradition transferred to groundhogs in the New World, but the underlying belief was the same, and it traces back to the Scottish Highlands and the lore of the Cailleach. In some versions of the story, the Cailleach doesn't walk the land on Brigid's Day. Instead, on the Isle of Man, she was said to take the form of a gigantic bird. She flew across the island carrying sticks in her beak, gathering fuel for the remainder of winter. Again, if she was seen, it was a bad sign. If she remained hidden, spring would arrive soon. The watching for animals emerging from their winter dens was another form of divination. Snakes, as we have discussed, were Brigid's creatures, and their emergence was a blessing. But badgers were watched too, and their behaviour interpreted. If they came out and stayed out, foraging actively, it suggested mild weather ahead. If they emerged, looked around, and retreated back into their burrows, winter still had teeth. Ravens and crows, those birds of omen and prophecy, were observed carefully around Brigid. Their calls, their flight patterns, the direction they flew, all carried meaning. A raven circling 3 times over a house might foretell death, but ravens flying east at dawn on Brigid was a sign of coming fertility and good fortune. The watching for oyster catchers was particularly meaningful in coastal areas of Scotland. These black and white birds, with their bright orange beaks and distinctive piping calls, were known as breed servants. They were migratory, leaving Scotland for warmer climates in winter and returning in early spring. Tradition held that their arrival signalled the worst of winter was truly over, that breed had returned and spring would follow. In communities near the water, people would scan the skies and the shores on Brigid, hoping to spot the first oyster catchers. Children might be sent to watch by the water. When the birds were sighted, it was cause for celebration. Breed servants had arrived, and the goddess herself could not be far behind. All of this weather lore, all these omens and signs, represented an attempt to read the natural world, to find patterns and meaning in the behaviour of animals and the movement of weather systems. In a time before modern meteorology, when survival depended on understanding the seasons, such lore was invaluable, but it was also more than practical. It was a way of staying connected to the rhythms of the earth, of paying attention, of remaining alert to the subtle shifts that signalled change. The contest between the Cailleach and Brigid, between winter and spring, was not just a myth, it was lived experience. The people of the Highlands knew that February could be cruelly cold, that snow could fall deep into March, and the turning of the season was not automatic, but hard won. Honouring both the Cailleach and Brigid was a way of acknowledging this truth, of respecting the power of winter, even while welcoming spring. The fire has burned low once more. Outside this Highland cottage, the night is deep and still. February has arrived, and though snow may yet fall, and winds may yet blow, something has shifted. The light grows. The earth begins its slow awakening. The promise has been made and will be kept. We have travelled together through the customs and stories of Là Fhèill Brìghde, Brigid in Scotland. We have met Brigid in her many forms, goddess and saint, woman and white serpent, keeper of the sacred flame and lady of the holy wells. We have learned how the people of the Highlands and Islands honoured her, welcomed her into their homes, sought her blessings on this threshold day between winter and spring. We have seen the intimate rituals, the making of Brigid's bed, the leaving of cloth to be blessed, the checking of ashes for footprints. We have witnessed the tending of the sacred hearth fire, that flame that must never die, that connects the household to the divine. We have walked sunwise around holy wells, tied clooties to rowan branches, drunk from springs that rise from the heart of the earth. We have learned of weather lore and divination, of the Cailleach gathering firewood and Brigid emerging as a serpent from the mound. We have watched for oyster catchers and listened for the calls of ravens. We have heard the prayers of the Carmina Gadelica and understood how fire and water were woven through every aspect of this sacred day. All of these customs, all of these rituals, were ways that ordinary people connected with the sacred, ways they marked the turning of the seasons and sought to influence their own fate. In the face of winter's harshness, in the uncertainty of whether spring would truly come, whether the lambs would be born healthy, whether the stores of food would last, these rituals provided comfort and hope. But Brigid's Day was more than coping with hardship. It was a celebration of resilience. It honoured the forces that persisted through darkness and cold. The ewes carrying lambs, the seeds dormant in frozen soil, the fire carefully tended through long nights, the people themselves enduring, surviving, waiting for the light to return. And at Brigid's Day, the light did return, not completely, not yet, but enough to see that the worst had passed, enough to begin preparing for the work ahead, enough to feel hope kindling in the heart like the hearth fire coaxed back to flame each morning. Brigid in all her aspects represented this hope, the maiden goddess of spring, young and full of potential, the wise woman of healing and inspiration, the keeper of the forge, transforming raw material into something useful and beautiful, the foster mother, nurturing and protective, the white serpent emerging from the dark earth to bless the land with the promise of regeneration. In honouring her, the people of Scotland honoured all these things in themselves, their own resilience, their own creativity, their own capacity to nurture and protect, their own connection to the rhythms of the natural world. Many of these customs have faded now. Fewer hearth fires burn continuously. Fewer people visit the holy wells. But the customs are not entirely lost. In recent decades, there has been a revival of interest in the old ways. People are once again visiting sacred wells in Scotland, lighting candles on Brigid's night, honouring the white serpent and the return of spring. Whether one believes in Brigid as goddess or saint, or sees her as a symbol of the seasons turning, there is something powerful in these rituals. They connect us to the land, to the cycle of death and rebirth, to the generations who came before us and did these same things in this same place. And they remind us of truths that transcend any particular belief system. that light returns after darkness, that life persists through winter, that hope is not foolish but essential, that tending the flame, whatever form that flame takes in our lives, is sacred work. So as we sit here by the hearth tonight, let us take a moment to tend our own fires, to honour the light that persists in us through dark times, to welcome the stirring of new growth, new ideas, new possibilities, to cleanse what needs cleansing and bless what needs blessing. The serpent stirs beneath the hill, the oyster catchers return to the shore, the first milk flows. Spring is not here, not yet, but it is coming. It is always coming, and we, like our ancestors before us, will be here to welcome it when it arrives. May Brigid's blessing be upon you. May your hearth fire never fail. May your springs run pure and clear. May the white serpent of renewal visit you in your time of need, and may you always find, even in the depths of winter, the small stirrings of hope that promise the return of light. Rest well by the fire. Let the flames flicker and fade. Let sleep come gently, and know that tomorrow the sun will rise a little earlier, shine a little longer, and the wheel will turn as it always has, as it always will. And if you've found comfort and wonder in these old stories, consider sharing them with others. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let the folklore of Scotland warm your heart through the long winter nights. Good night from the hearth. Good night from Scotland. Good night.